Traumatic brain injury, or TBI, has become known as the signature injury in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The military population has a much greater risk at sustaining a brain injury than the civilian population. Blast injuries are the #1 and most common form of TBI in the war zone.
The way we first discovered that it had to be a brain injury, I had suspicions. I could see him stopping and not being able to find a word. I could see him doing something he would normally do and stop because he didn't know what to do next. There seemed to be some blanks. And the one thing the Army did is they sent him to a neuropsychologist. And she did some testing. And she says, kind of like, I got good news and I got bad news, Mado and Carol. The good news is Mado's a very intelligent man. The bad news is he has some very slow processing going on. And the testing showed that. So we knew right from the beginning that there was a TBI.
When I looked at those x-rays, and the doctor says, see these white spots? That's your broken things. It was like, okay, now I know. This is what's broken.
I think following a traumatic brain injury, individuals can experience a variety of different types of difficulties, and much of which depends on what they're involved in. They might experience difficulty in a school or work setting. Maybe they're not as efficient as they used to be, and that's creating some difficulties for them in school or work. They might be more forgetful than they're used to, and they have to rely on strategies to help maintain their memory. So they might have to keep more notes or use a recorder or reminders to take medications or to kind of participate in the daily activities that they were used to doing, maybe without those strategies in place. They can try to avoid or improve those by, again, getting some education about what to expect after the injury, and then maybe putting some of those strategies into place early on when they return, so they can maybe just better prepare for the problems if they do arise.
They can sustain brain injuries without being diagnosed as having one. A lot of times the symptoms can be very subtle. So they might not think about the symptoms as being a result of the brain injury. They can have some headaches, they can have some dizziness sometimes, and a lot of times they're transient, especially in the mild brain injuries. But they can also persist. So even the mild injuries, their symptoms can stay longer than what we normally would expect.
So I think in cases of more where physical injuries take precedence, or someone's been severely injured, it's certainly possible that someone could have also sustained a mild traumatic brain injury or concussion during that event, and it might not be noticed at the time because they're pretty focused on the injuries that require immediate attention. And so when an individual returns home and that physical rehab is kind of settled down and they're kind of getting back on their feet, so to speak, they might notice some problems with their thinking in the way of concentration problems, forgetfulness, just not quite feeling themselves.
The only thing that I can tell patients, or their loved ones for that matter, is if you suspect that a person might have had a brain injury, be it mild or moderate or severe, and are having problems, that they should seek medical help, because rehabilitation does improve some of the outcomes for these patients.
He was very anxious, very fidgety, almost so anxious, anxiety-ridden, I would say it was verging on panic. Looking around, hyper-vigilant, anything that was out of sorts or anyone coming in the driveway or a noise going by, he was jumping, because a noise over there meant something bad. They're in the desert, it's sheer quiet all the time unless something bad is going on. And so I didn't know who this guy was, because he was anxious, and along with his anxiety came some anger and frustration. He didn't know what was wrong, and I didn't know what was wrong. I just knew it was wrong.
Of course, PTSD was diagnosed immediately, and it took probably till the end of 2008 for somebody to start recognizing that he might have had a brain injury, but they didn't really know what they wanted to do with it, and actually they told us, leave it alone and he'll eventually get better on his own. You know, just getting him diagnosed, I think, has been a big struggle.
Many service members and veterans report having PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. The symptoms of TBI and PTSD can be very similar, and it is possible to have both.
The most classical post-traumatic stress disorder signs are an event that you perceived as either life-threatening or potentially life-threatening. So you had an event, and that could be something that occurs on TV or physically occurs to you. But then we start seeing people who start re-experiencing the event in their dreams with things that remind them of the event. There are avoidance activities. They don't want to cross the bridge because that's where the bombing was. You know, the avoidance can get to the point where they don't leave the house. Now, some of these events, from the avoidance and the re-experience and the arousal where they can't sleep at night and they're just feisty and they're argumentative and those arousal symptoms, those are the classic findings for post-traumatic stress.
Prior to 1980, there really wasn't a diagnosis of PTSD, so we would consider that soldiers had a problem, unfortunately, that there was something wrong with them. It's had various names: shell shock, soldier's heart, meaning that they weren't in the battle. Battle fatigue was another name for it. And it really wasn't until after Vietnam that we finally recognized that this really is a serious anxiety problem that is affecting people, and it affects people in the military twice as much as what we see in the general population. And now we can actually treat people for what it was. People used to be considered bad or wimpy, or something was wrong with them, and they were told just to go back out there. And now we know that it really is a serious condition that needs help.
There are two major approaches to post-traumatic stress. One is cognitive behavioral therapy, that's the term we use, and the other are meds. The cognitive behavioral therapy is found to be very, very effective, not only early on, but preventing the extension, the prolongation of the syndrome. But the majority of patients who do not respond to cognitive behavioral therapy, there are medicines called sertraline, which is Zoloft, for example, or paroxetine, which is Paxil, that seems to be very effective. These are serotonin reuptake inhibitors we're very familiar with, but it seems to be very effective in these patients. We're aware of the changes in the brain after PTSD. We have very good studies on what actually happens inside the brain. The areas that, interestingly enough, our memories are not very good. They're actually inhibited, but our arousal centers, our emotional centers are just disinhibited. So we end up having to sort of decrease the anxiety and decrease the depression and get people back.
The downside is, especially with people who have been in the military, there's a lot of people who think that this is a sign of weakness and they need to just walk it off and let it go, and eventually it will go away on its own. And we know that that's almost never the case.
She was very, very angry and very upset, and I can remember feeling like my heart was broken because she said to me, "Don't expect the old Jeanette. Forget her. She's gone."
You know, I knew something was wrong with him, and he knew something was wrong, but if he couldn't figure it out, he would get livid, just livid.
Service members may also have an undiagnosed brain injury. They might get home and then find themselves with questions or concerns, or maybe their family is the first to recognize that they may have sustained a TBI.
You can expect when somebody comes home with an injury that they are going to be confused. They have lived a life fully functioning in a certain way for 20, 30, 40 years, and now they're in maybe a wheelchair, they've lost a limb, or they process things and information differently. And they may not even remember everybody who's in their family, depending on the extent of the injury. So everybody has to be slow, calm, and try to keep as even keel as possible, because expressed emotion from family members could be very triggering for the person who's coming home who's either confused or injured, and then that could lead to a lot more trauma for them that they have to deal with, because now they feel responsible for their family feeling bad and things of that nature as well.
Imagine a veteran coming home has a TBI and they're different, and so that's going to affect a different relationship with mother, daughter, sister, brother, father. When that family system is affected, the family has to find a way to say, okay, who is this new person now? I think one of the ways is just to normalize, is just to really say, hey, you are different now. This did happen. We have to accept this process. But how can we move to a new place of reintroducing ourselves to one another, understanding who we are now after this event has happened.
And then she came home. And when she came home, she was different. She was angry. She was angry all the time. She had no patience. She had a constant blink. And I remember that she couldn't focus. You couldn't have dialogue with her because she became easily agitated.
I think for, the family members, it's a lot of trying to balance the new roles with their old roles. And that takes time and it takes practice, and maybe it takes, getting other family members involved and trying to take on some of those responsibilities. There's sometimes for the family, whether it's a spouse or the child, sometimes they have to be allowed time to grieve, and that it's okay to grieve, that, this person might be different. He might be a new different now, and learning to accept the new difference. A lot of times just saying to the spouse, for example, that, it's okay to be angry that, this happened to your loved one. And it's okay to be angry that, they're a little different. And going through all of those steps and, finally learning to, I kind of, we can learn how to still love each other even though he might be a little different.
I'd like him to learn to accept his limitations, and not to say to settle for them. I mean, you can always strive to improve, but there has to come a place of acceptance that this is the way it is now. And okay, once you get to the point of acceptance, I think you're at the point where then you can look at how you can improve.
As each injured individual is very different, so too are the brain injuries. They can be very different, and so is the road to recovery. Family plays a huge part in the role of rehabilitation and care when it comes to the brain injury.
When transitioning home, the most important thing to do is when you return to get a full physical. Many people are offered that and they say no because they just want to get off the bus and they want to go be with their families and they want to get out of there. And that's one of the biggest mistakes anybody can make, because if there is a physical problem or if there is some kind of psychological issue going on and you don't get that exam when you're leaving, the military is able to say, well, you left, and that could have happened after you left the military. We don't know, so we don't have to pay for that. So it is very important for every soldier to get that physical and do all of those necessary things when they return. Don't just rush through it to try to get out of it. Do all the paperwork and save copies of absolutely everything. I know several military people that I've worked with who have chronic injuries that are related to their military experience that aren't covered because they skipped out on that, and the military has no proof that it occurred then in the military.
What will need to be done to provide a smooth transition to home is going to depend on the severity of the brain injury. So it may be something as simple as, educating friends and families regarding the servicemen and what happened to them and the changes that they might be expected to see in them. So if it were, say it were my family member, I might say, hey, listen, he's coming home tomorrow. He might not remember who you are, or he might be acting differently. So other people know what to expect. That can help. Another thing that people can do is setting up a schedule. That's going to be really important. Structure becomes very important for people who've had brain injuries. So when the serviceman returns home, making sure that you do have some kind of structure or schedule in place for them. That can help decrease emotional outbursts and frustration, making sure there's enough rest time and extended time built into the schedule, because things will likely take longer. Things that you didn't have to think about before, you may need extra time to perform now.
Short-term memory is still affected, so the kids have had to pick up on that side of things, and just general things. I mean, they know Dad's not as happy as he used to be, and they know he can be moody, so they, you know, plan what they're doing based on how he acts during the day, or so. Yeah, they've learned to pick up on a lot of things when I'm not there to physically do it, to help him, to help guide him.
I think it's important to transition back into home slowly. So we always tell folks to kind of take it easy. Don't try to return to everything that you were doing prior to your deployment. So maybe that means, if you were in school, maybe that means taking less coursework, not jumping into a full load of coursework. Maybe that means returning to work part-time. So we often tell people it's important to kind of ease back into their role in their civilian life. If they don't do that, sometimes folks do just fine, but it's often easier on them to kind of transition that way. They're not taking on everything all at once.
First, to be easy with themselves. Understand that they have survived a very traumatic experience, and to understand that there are going to be some changes, there are going to be some difficulties, and not to be overly judgmental of themselves, or not to be so harsh on themselves, but to take each day as a gift and as a blessing and as an offering, and to celebrate and enjoy life with them, with their family and with their friends. So be easy with themselves, take care of themselves.
That it's really important to move slowly and know that it's a transition. Use the support of your loved ones and the community, because it can be overwhelming. It is an adjustment. We try to make tasks that we work on during the acute period functional, so that hopefully that transition will be a little easier, so that you'll be better able to get back into the house, get back into work or school, and be able to kind of compensate while you're still recovering. But I think just to take it step by step, and to keep that support around you, not only family, not only whether it's church or mental health providers, but constantly, not isolating yourself, using what's around you so that it can be a successful transition for you.
It's hard both ways, like having a dad with a brain injury and then having a mom who has to dedicate all her time to your dad because of his situation. So just basically to take it day by day and try to understand it from both sides.
To a family member that's welcoming the soldier back home is to be there for them, to understand that they may look, act different than what they were before, but their essence is still there.
Supporting the service member or veteran who has sustained the brain injury is an important part of the recovery process and of the journey forward.